don't have to make this super formal. But welcome.
Glad to be here.
I assume you have a hard stop in 45 minutes or in 40 minutes. So we'll make sure to be respectful of that. And often our audience...
We don't want to bore people on the podcast anyway.
Often our audience asks questions. So guys, if you have questions, make sure to ask them early so that you get them in. I don't think we'll get through all of them with David. So our guest today is one of the world's most successful executives. David Kenny is executive chairman at Nielsen. And he was, or you were, David, their CEO until just last month. You led Nielsen during one of the most critical periods of its history. Notably, you piloted Nielsen through a major buyout, which took them from a publicly listed S&P 500 business to being the privately held company it is today. David, welcome to the Blitzscaling podcast.
Delighted to be here, Julian.
I have more intro here. It's so hard. I had to put your bio into two blocks.
Oh my.
I've never had to do this, but you're just so illustrious.
I'm just old. I've done too many things.
MBA from Harvard. You're on the board of Best Buy. You used to, before Nielsen, head up the Watson line of business at IBM. You've been CEO of Akamai. Is that how it's pronounced?
It is Akamai, yeah.
And I didn't know this, but at some point you were the favorite to be the CEO of Yahoo. A little trivia point that I have found doing research.
Well, anyway, I didn't do that job, so.
Yeah. So it's such an impressive background and such a honor to have you here on the podcast. For a topic that you in my mind are the world's, top expert on, which is helpfulness, empowering others. I think the way you put it is giving away power to others. And really, there's nobody in the world who does this, better than you, David. And, it's an honor to have the opportunity to discuss this with you.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I deserve all of that, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
So let's just start by walking through your professional history. And it'd be helpful, or I'll try to suss out from this, kind of like where you figured out that it was such a powerful move to be helpful to others. And because it's like such a non-obvious thing, I think, to most people. So you started, I guess we can start college. You went to Kettering University, which is in Michigan.
Yeah.
Were you committed to helpfulness back then, or how did you live this value as a 18-year-old?
Well, it's I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And so at the time, Kettering was the General Motors Institute. It was a co-op school, which meant I could find a way to afford to pay for it, which was a big deal. And, General Motors was kind to me. People were, I felt like I got a lot of opportunities to advance myself. So I was grateful for that, which came in later. Because you're formed by those experiences. But, I was actually just the beneficiary of some folks who saw my potential and were willing to create an opportunity for me to achieve it.
And how did you go from Kettering or the General Motors Institute to, because you did your MBA at Harvard, did you jump into that right after, or how did that happen?
In the mid 80s, when I finished GMI, they had a program for folks who had both done, important leadership roles on campus and had done well academically, in that they would pay for you to go on and get a master's degree, either in business or engineering. And so I chose business, got accepted to Harvard, and went there on a fellowship. So again, GM was great to me in the beginning of my career. So that's how I ended up there. And it was really right after.
I wonder if you at all crossed, because you're about the same age as Chris, who co-hosts this with me, and he also did his MBA at Harvard. So I wonder if you guys, like, I don't know which years he went, but
Yeah, I finished it. So I was in the class with Mary Barra, who's the CEO of GM today, and her
interesting.
husband. So and I'm so impressed by what she's doing, and it's just great to see her rise, to see an engineer run the company after many years of finance people. So it was a good class. So you'll have to check with him. It was a class of '84.
And
Now you got to remember, half of us went to school and half of us went to work, and then we swapped. So you only knew half of your class.
half the people. So where did you go? Like, maybe we can skip over some stuff. I know you spent a lot of time.
Oh yeah,
So where?
yeah.
How did you get to Nielsen?
So you follow the data. So I started out at GMI in industrial administration, focused on engineering. So always loved math and science, and certainly did a fair amount of analytics. When I left business school, I was at GM first, then at Bain. And my first company, Digitas, was about how could you apply models and algorithms to advertising. And we ran very early banner ads on Prodigy, AOL, and CompuServe, because those were the platforms at the time, and use data to figure out how to put the right ad in front of people. It sounds obvious now, but it was it was really groundbreaking at the time, and certainly ran that business, including the sale to Publicis, and loved data. From there did Akamai, which is about using data to tee up the way video is delivered to people. And I think that made the internet reduce its latency. So it was a great infrastructure play. That took me to weather, which got me from data to machine learning and AI, because we moved the weather forecast from TV to mobile phones. So when it was preloaded on all Apple phones and on all Android phones, of course, we had to really make sure that we could do this all by machine. I got news for you. There aren't thousands of meteorologists writing that forecast every day that you read on your phone. That all comes off machine. And then that caught the eye of IBM, which was standing up the Watson unit. And that's how that business got bought by IBM. Full circle, Nielsen called me when they decided they needed to change CEOs and get ready for a big transition. This was 5 years ago. This was 2018 when I was recruited there. And I was able to bring the combination of all that advertising experience from Digitas and all that AI machine learning experience to kind of rethink what are ratings and how do you best understand the audience when she's watching on demand across so many different options. And it's just been fun to bring all that experience together over the last 5 years.
So where in that journey did you really start to lean into, the power that comes from sharing power, the power that comes, or the kind of like benefits that come from being helpful to others?
Yeah, I would say Digitas was probably, where I really focused on this. Bain, like all the consulting firms, recruited the top grads from business schools. So it was a pretty, elite organization. You could get a lot done, but, you wrote decks, you didn't operationalize much. And when I came to Digitas, and granted, this is when the dot-com boom was just starting, 95, 96. My view was, how do you compete for talent when there just isn't enough talent in the industry? And that got me thinking about, am I getting full potential of every human? And everybody says, our people are our greatest asset, but they don't treat them that way. And so, you invest in assets, you take care of assets, you refuel assets. And I just found a number of people felt they could do more. They didn't feel seen. I think this is also where I got a real focus on diversity and inclusion. Women of color actually turned out to be really important to Digitas's success, because there were several of them that we just lit on fire by giving them more responsibility than they had been given, and really teaching people to let people bring their whole self to work. And so, it wasn't about being nice, it was about winning. But it actually turns out that you can win better when everybody is at full potential. And that takes, kindness, investment, support. And kindness doesn't always mean nice. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is give them direct feedback on what they need to work on. But if you do that in a way that is not critical, but actually points them to being better, people respond to it. And Digitas had a great run for many, many years. And I think a lot of it was our culture.
And can you give us examples, like sort of like one or two things that stand out to you as like things that you did that are just different than what everybody else does?
I think stop to know people's stories. So we had a really good engineer named Wambui Kenya, and she, great web developer. But as a Black woman, not everybody even thought that she was in that job. And I think, and she was quiet and wasn't being noticed, and certainly wasn't being moved up. And I saw her potential, but took the time to hear her story, hear how she came from Kenya to Boston to work with us, saw what was possible, and then just made a point of giving her extra assignments, calling her out in meetings, making sure she got some exposure. So, and boy, she just delivered and inspired so many other people to deliver. She works at Google now in Africa, and I continue to just be so proud of her. And I think she just didn't think she had the right to ask. She was just grateful to have the job, and I helped her see that actually you can do more. It's okay to ask for more, and I'm going to show people what you can do. And there are many like that that happened in those days. More recently, one of the things I do at Nielsen, because I chair the board still, and I did all the time I was there, is I start every board meeting with something I call 15 minutes of fame. And it's finding someone 3-4 levels down in the organization who's done something really spectacular, but normally it wouldn't be board level. And normally somebody 3 levels up would take credit for it. And I always bring people in from that level. It's their first chance to present to the board. And we start every meeting with like, here's somebody who did something spectacular. And I think, it started with Wambui, and I've just found giving a spotlight to people, giving them recognition, inspires them, but it also inspires everybody else, because they realize that all their jobs are important. It's not just that you at the top do the important jobs.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. Like I know when I think back, on my career, you probably don't know or care or have cared, but
I do care.
When I actually dropped out of college in my first year and worked in a political party in Canada, which is a main left-wing political party. And I was really young, like I was 19, and I was lucky that the guy who eventually became the leader of the party was extremely supportive of me, but also other people, like the chief of staff to the leader hired me originally. Like there were just a lot of people who, honestly, they didn't invest that much time into it or much effort, but they just like gave me the time of day and believed in me and showed to me and to others that they believed in me. And it's amazing how that just changed who I am and changed my entire life trajectory. It's like, hey, whoa, this guy who eventually became Prime Minister of Canada cares about me. And it's like, whoa, like who knew when you're 19? Like that's insane. But it's also just like generally, and there's so much impact that you can have as someone in a position of power. But I think the way you put it is just like giving a little bit of your power to others. I don't know if that aligns with, like, that's the experience that came to mind when I was hearing your examples.
Yeah, no, listen, and to be fair, that's how he won an election, because there were a lot of people like you who felt invested and worked hard to make it happen. So it it pays back when you can really take an interest in people and get them aligned with you. So yeah, I totally think that's in the same kind of general direction here.
One of the things, so I've tried to define this, and listening to you, I think it's, something about taking people who have a lot of potential but don't have opportunity. And like you as a leader, you can't give people potential. You can't give them, hustle. You can't give them smarts. You can't give them their abilities.
Yep.
But thankfully, there are a lot of people with abilities in the world. And what you can do as a leader is give them opportunities or give them, confidence. And so it's really kind of like taking people with potential, but without opportunities, and then giving them the opportunities so that they can kind of like realize their potential. Is that the, like, how would you amend that kind of like those mechanics?
Listen, I think people also need self-confidence. So I think it's really important to have conversations with people about what do you love about your job? What do you hate about your job? What are your happy days? What are your frustrating days? And, how can we structure, your work to have on balance, more productive, happy, fruitful days? Because generally people have more confidence and perform better when they're doing things they love doing. And quite honestly, sometimes I think it takes redefining work in a way that makes that happen. And when I talk about giving up power, I do a lot to say, this is our goal, but how you get to the goal can be more than one way. I'm not one of those bosses who tries to improve on everybody else's work. I don't think, that's the way to add value. The way to add value is to help people, be at maximum impact when they're doing their work. So spending time on the how, not just the what, with folks, I think is key to getting it right. And then you can't be the only kind person in a culture either. I think you've got to really reward people who are getting the most out of others. You got to get a lot of feedback, 360 interviews, talk to people. And bosses need to know that they're not getting rewarded just because they delivered revenue or profit or product. They have to also be developing people, or they're not strengthening the company. And that's the hard decisions when people are delivering financial results, but not the people investment. You still got to take them out if they can't get their heads around it.
We have a comment here from someone I think Patrick Vogt, VOGT.
Oh, I know Patrick Vogt. He was at Weather.
And I'm going to pull up his comment in 2 minutes. So Patrick, thank you for contributing this comment. But I wanted to, it's actually aligned with what Patrick was saying. I wanted to talk about experience I had, or a moment where I witnessed you doing this, and it's just you're so like good at it, so it's useful to kind of use these examples. So I did this Zoom event during COVID with Rashad Tabakawala, who you know, and I invited you to come, and you came. And at the beginning of the event, I remember you kind of like said something. Everyone was listening, and you said, "Hey, Rashad, when you're there, I'm there," right? And I am sure that just that small comment totally changed Rashad's kind of perspective. Like Rashad's a pretty senior guy. I mean, he's less high up than you, but like just like this blessing from you probably totally changed the way that he approached that event. Probably changed the way he approached that day and that week and maybe even that month. And it also totally changed how everyone who was there thought of Rashad and interacted with Rashad. So those kind of like, 5 second, like 10 words were so impactful.
Yeah, and I meant it. So that's the other thing, it was truly authentic. So it's listen, it gives I love people. It gives me great joy to see people like you and Rashad, out there doing new things. So, yeah, it's terrific.
I'll just pull up Patrick's comment here. So Patrick says, so thank you again, Patrick. Patrick says, David has been an incredible mentor for me. He truly, authentically cares about people and developing them. Kindness costs nothing. Is that a quote from you?
Well,
Kindness costs nothing?
it's not. I think it's from Patrick, but it's thank you, Patrick. I appreciate the comment, and Patrick's done some amazing things. So from the time I first met him, back at Sony. So I don't think it's even that it costs nothing. I think of it as an investment. It creates something. So it's true. I don't want to, but to me, it creates assets. It creates followership. It creates alignment. It creates goodness. It creates energy. So for like you said, a kind word to Rashad before he went. And, we were all learning how to do these big Zoom meetings at the time. A little bit of endorsement goes a long way. So I think if you can invest to help people show up a little better, to feel a little more self-confident, it helps them, but it helps you too, and it just makes the whole thing go better.
So this is actually a good segue into, I'm going to hide the comment. Like one of the questions I had is just like, how do you prioritize this over other things? It's like, I mean, maybe I'm thinking of it wrong, but actual true kindness actually, like, it does cost something. It costs headspace and kind of like mental energy. You have to like care about people, learn about them, and maybe that comes naturally to you, but it's also like it's not a zero cost activity. So how do you think how do you think of prioritizing these things? Like, why is it that showing up to this event for Rashad was more important than doing the 5 million other things that you could have been doing that day as CEO of a public company?
Well, I think first of all, when you're kind, you create more energy, so things are actually going better. So if I take that example, Rashad's a great thinker. I ask him for thoughts. Otherwise, he actually out of that came and spoke to Nielsen in a way that really inspired our folks on some of the things we needed to tackle as media changed. So it comes back. So to me, it wasn't that hard. And it helped on Zoom. I didn't have to travel. So, to put in 45 minutes, and I learned something at the time. I met some interesting people. And, Rashad and I built a stronger bond so that later when I needed Rashad to help me with something else, he did. So, you got to get your job done. But I think when you find people that you can invest in, you're going to get a return on it. And it's well worth the time. And quite honestly, it gives me energy to do things like that. So it keeps me going during the day and the week as well. And COVID was hard. I'm an extrovert. So, being locked up and only seeing people virtually was tough. I learned, but it was tough at the beginning. And so, I would say I got out of it more than I put into it anyway.
Here's a comment from Patrick again, who says that in fact it was kindness costs nothing is a quote from you, according to him.
Okay, Patrick has a good memory, and yes, I will own it. I will own it. And it does cost nothing, right? It doesn't cost. But I would say, since then I've evolved to actually see that it creates something, and I hope people are hearing that as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like maybe a way of thinking about it is in some situations, being kind to others and going out of your way to be kind to others is by far the highest leverage use of your time. And it's high leverage. I'm trying to like translate what you're saying into a framework. And it's high leverage for two reasons. One, it has such a huge impact on the other people. But then two, it's much lower cost than you would think, because the ROI is just so obvious, because the cost to you is offset by the kind of like emotional energy that you get. Like it's not like answering emails. It's
Right.
it's actually pleasant and like uplifts you at the same time as it uplifts the others.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I would completely agree with that.
And how would you do you have thoughts on like what's the tipping point? Like obviously you're not spending 100% of your time doing this, and I'm sure you could. So how do you rationalize, when to do it versus when not, or how do you structure that?
Listen, I don't think I'm ever unkind. To me, kindness really means that you're taking a minute to learn the other person, to learn what they're about, to have an interest in them as a whole person, and to figure out how to help them be successful. And usually the people I'm interacting with are the people I work with. So that all pays back immediately, because it's about getting whatever we need to get done. But I think making sure there's empathy, and that, discussions are not just what needs to happen, but, a little bit human, goes a long way. You covered my whole career, so I was lucky to meet a number of great people in each of those chapters. I do think I have a great value and a great asset in all those relationships. And so when people that were important to me in the past ask for something, I'll do it if I can find the time, because I think, I appreciate what they did before, and generally, they might do it again. So I don't want to be cynical about it. I think it gives me great in and of itself. But, if you can find time to interact with people, it inevitably helps you get things done, more than just focusing on getting it done.
It's interesting. So let's say Reid Hoffman, who's, this podcast is his project. And actually, this whole podcast is a good example of what we're talking about, right? Where he's, empowering me by, enabling me to use his brand, right?
Yep.
And supporting me in other ways too. And I've noticed that most of the people who are actually successful, right? Like your level of success, Reid's level of success, that's just how they operate, right? I have yet to meet somebody who's actually, 99 percentile successful, who doesn't work in that way. Yet, when you talk to, let's say, a student, right? So somebody at the beginning of their career, they get the impression that that's not how the world works. They get the impression that the world is cutthroat and everyone's out for themselves. And, they're surprised when they come across people who are truly helpful. I mean, I actually, I have a girl I pay to just add students on my LinkedIn. And I just connect with them. I'm like, hey, you want to jump on a 10-minute Zoom, and I'll see, if there's something I can do to help you. And there almost always is. So I do this. I mean, I spend 10 minutes a day on it. It's not some huge thing, but the impression that students have, and young people have, is that that's just not a normal practice. When my impression is that it is. What's the disconnect there? Have you, how would you explain that?
Listen, there are successes out there of folks who are just driven around their product, and I think drive it out of their own brains and their own will, as opposed to really getting the most out of everybody. and it's kind of like there are individual sports and team sports. I think anything that's sustainable is a team sport in business, but there are certainly people who've succeeded playing it as an individual sport for some time, particularly in the tech world. So people know those examples, and they get kind of celebrated, and they kind of think that's the way it is. And it maybe that's been their experience to date. So until people see another way of working, they're trying to find their way and trying to figure out who to emulate. So I can see how people do get confused on this. And I also just think, there's so much of education that is about getting the right answer and not necessarily enough on getting the right process. And so, I certainly believe more needs to be taught about process. I think it sometimes investing in humans is viewed as the soft side. And I think that's where you get into mistakes. It's not soft. Being kind is not soft. It's about, a way of winning. It's about being a coach to great athletes. It's about, keeping your ego in check and realizing that, the best thing you can do is to have everybody else's ego be a little bit bigger and a little more self-confident. But that's all about winning, which is the hard stuff, not the soft stuff. But I think that's where people get confused.
There's something comes to mind when I was hearing you talk about this, just a story that Reid Hoffman tells. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's a conversation or a kind of debate that he had with Peter Thiel when they were founders of PayPal together. And apparently Peter, who I don't know, he's a chess player, and he wanted to hire people who were, had done like individual sports. And he thought, the best hires are people who are, chess players and individual sports, stuff like that. And Reid said, no.
Elon Musk was in that mix too. So, yeah, I know this story.
So Reid wanted to hire sports, like team sports, people who played team sports. And according to Reid, Peter came around to his way of thinking by the end of PayPal. So I don't know. People's recollection of what happened 20 years ago is not necessarily the most accurate, but it does kind of tell the same story that you're telling.
Yeah, no, I believe the story is true. And it is how Reid thinks, and I think he was right about it. Because this, kindness is about creating the glue for teams to work together. Great coaches are kind, right? Particularly team coaches. That doesn't mean they're not tough. That doesn't mean they're not pushing for full potential, but you're doing it in a way when everybody can have each other's back. And that the team is stronger than a collection of great individuals. And that's the same in business.
How would you, let's say half of our audience are like young people who are aspiring entrepreneurs. Okay.
Yep.
If you're them, how do you get started on this journey? Right? Like if you haven't practiced this muscle of just going out of your way to be kind to people in an effective manner, how do you start that? Like should you just start being nice to waitresses and to everybody that you come across? Or where do you start?
Yeah, listen, it's always good to be polite. It's good to have that muscle. So if you're not doing that, do that. But I would say, some of this, I'll go back to the Digitas time. But even when I take over businesses as a CEO, I think you've got to start by assessing what you love doing, what you don't love doing, what needs to be done, and therefore, what does your team need to look like? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't always have the confidence to make sure. You should make sure your CFO is better at that than you would ever be. And if you need a chief product officer, that they're better at that than you would ever be. If you're adding value to your team in their core area of expertise, then you've underhired. And so then you got to say, okay, well, how am I going to get people to realize their full potential? How am I going to set them up for success? Because no entrepreneur is, this is about blitzscaling, right? As a theme, nobody's going to build something of scale and sustainability without having all the right players in effort. And if you start with that's what I have to do, then how can my demeanor, how can my interactions, how can my leadership and coaching, how can my words empower them? And it just starts to be natural that this is an asset. How do I get the most of it? Versus this is a tool, and how do I use it to pound this nail? And if you really just take that mindset every day, you'll find your team get stronger. You'll find yourselves going faster, and then it'll be the next level down. And as a team, spending enough time on how you do that. But to me, this is all in service of a purpose. It's not just because it's good to do. Of course it is, but I encourage entrepreneurs to be focused and have their eye on the prize, and to realize, what team you need to achieve that prize.
So for me, I mean, you're a CEO. I mean, I'm unemployed now, but when
You're doing this?
well, I'm starting a new business, or I'm researching my potential next business. And this podcast is technically supposed to follow my journey starting a new business.
Oh, cool.
So, but yeah, so I'm unemployed now, but in my last two jobs, I was CEO, right? And there's something about the CEO title where it's kind of like, okay, look, I could fire anybody. Like anybody in this business could be fired by me. Not really, but has that kind of aura. So in a way, you don't have to flex on people, right? Like people will just be nice to you, internally at least, and even externally. While for most of the team members, it's not like that. Like there is a lot of like politics. There's a lot of various dynamics that you need to manage. So let's say you're a junior person in a in a business starting their career, or a senior executive. How like is there something different about how you would apply these principles that we're talking about? The principles like kindness, giving away power, in a context where there are kind of more difficult and power dynamics at play.
Yeah, I got this. So first of all, I do want to be clear that I think a CEO's title is Chief Energy Officer. And so, it's not executive. So if you don't realize your job is to create energy to win, you're not going to win. So yeah, and I would encourage younger people to pick companies, environments, leaders that energize them. And if you're not energized, you should probably be looking. And there was a really, and you brought up Reed. Another good book he wrote was The Covenant, which was about having these 3-year tours of duty.
Yeah,
and
which Chris wrote with him.
Oh, exactly. So I love that book. And I would, and I think, if you're a young person, whenever you start something, you should really you should time box yourself into kind of a 3-year time horizon. You got to learn it. You got to do a good job of it. You got to replace yourself. And then you decide if you're going to re-up to something else. But I think if after 3 years you're not energized, you should call it and find something else, because everybody deserves to have maximum energy. If you take that as a mindset, then I think the way you interact with others is how do you create energy around others that you're working with on your team, because you're inevitably on a team with your manager, up the organization. So the more you are creating energy versus sapping energy, the more useful you're going to be to the company. But honestly, I think the more successful you're going to be. So, and if you're starting out, but you want to be the CEO one day, the most important skill is how to create energy. And generally it's zero sum. I find there are people who create energy and there are people who sap energy. And you should just, I would just encourage you to look at yourself every day and say, did I create energy today? Or did I did I sap it out of others? And was energy created in me or not? And if you just kind of sit in that, at the end of the day, I think it'll help you make good choices the next day.
Okay, David, we are right on time.
Wow.
So
that was fast.
Yeah, well, it always goes so quickly to do these. I have so much more to ask you on this topic, but hopefully we'll be able to do that over lunch or another episode at some point. But
well, if you're going to start something else, I want to hear about that when you're ready.
Yeah, I definitely will. I'll reach out. Well, reach out to you. I'm
please do.
Researching things, trying to figure things out. I don't. It's so hard to come up with a actually valuable business idea, which people underestimate the importance of that process. So, specifically, I have in the past underestimated the importance of that process. I'm not making that mistake this time.
Good for you.
But I do want to be mindful that you're a busy person, so I'll let you jump. I'll just start. A, thank you to the folks who asked questions. B, thank you, David, for joining us. C, thank you to our team, Brendan, Shlok, and Bio, who make all this happen. And David, maybe you can leave us with where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, got to say that if you're doing some of the reads, you can find me on LinkedIn, which is probably the best place, honestly. So, and I do read the messages there if you want to message me directly. And if you got something to share, please share it. That'd be the best place to find me.
Well, thank you again, David. And I will end the stream.